Hey, and welcome back to the Case by Case podcast, which is no longer purely Ace Attorney anymore because apparently there's a lot more court case than anime than we ever thought of. And speaking of that, we have part 6 of JoJo actually, and that's where we're going to pick off for this episode for today. So, Oju, would you like to introduce the very short court case that didn't even take an episode for the show? Like, literally. Like, that's how short it is.
So essentially what happens is the main character of JoJo's Part 6, Jolene, is not driving but is in the passenger seat of a car that hits a pedestrian. And so rather than report it as an accident, the boyfriend tries to hide the body. But then at the scene, if I remember correctly, he bails and then... Or I don't know if it's directly shown what happened, but at the scene, basically Jolene is arrested, and I forget what the charge is, but she's basically charged with being responsible for the death.
It might have been manslaughter.
I have to look back, but she is interviewing with her attorney, who I don't even know. I don't think we're told how they got in contact with the attorney. When you watch the
I think
anime,
she said that the state was paying for him. I think she brought that up.
Okay. Because, yeah, we can talk about that later. But if you watch the anime, it'll make sense why the lawyer represented her specifically, which I won't say for spoilery reasons, but... essentially what he does is he says, look, these are the charges. We can go to trial, but you risk going to jail, or you risk losing at trial and doing even more jail time. So why don't you just accept a plea bargain and take, I forget what he said they were going to give her. At the most, I think he said like a very small sentence. But then what happened
he was lying about that, though, regardless.
Right, he was lying. So what happens is they go to court, and the judge says, okay, so you've accepted the plea bargain, and you've pled guilty to all charges. But because this is such a dangerous crime and blah, 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 we're actually going to give you such and such sentence. Which, that is what the judge is legally allowed to do, because it's kind of weird. The lawyers, so at that point in the process, there wouldn't have been a jury because she hadn't gone to trial yet. They were at there's another word for it, but basically the very early point where she either pleads guilty and they just give her the sentence, or she pleads not guilty and they have to go to court to settle it, which is not what she did. But in any event, the lawyers involved give a recommendation for sentences, and judges also have like a rubric to guide them on what they should sentence, but it's ultimately the judge that decides. And then, yeah, it becomes clear that the lawyer did it on purpose, that he knew Jolene would get a much more severe sentence than what he told her, and that it was all a big conspiracy to get her in jail.
Yeah, so, like, for example, if she just was part of just helping carry off the body, it seems like, at least according to Wikipedia, it would have been around maybe 4 or 7 years for assisting with it. But obviously in this case, Romeo just did her dirty with the lawyer, as it's kind of shown a bit later.
Well, so in the case, like the the proceeding, we'll call it. I forget. Is it agreed to that she was the one driving the car?
So she agrees to it when her attorney's kind of interrogating her, because the attorney is like, "Oh, do you love him and stuff?" And she's like, "Kind of yes."
Okay, yeah,
And she
gotcha.
kind of is pressured into it.
Yeah, so it would have been different if she had been charged with just being in the car and helping, but
That's what I was
because
trying to bring up. If she actually said the truth, she would at least get a minor sentence compared to what she got in the anime.
yeah, because aiding and abetting is its own thing, but um, because she was charged with driving the car and murdering the pedestrian, she would be like solely responsible.
Yeah, according to the Wikipedia, she would have been considered like an accessory to manslaughter because she was just
Right.
assisting hide the body.
Yeah, the thing about uh, crimes like that is it varies within states because certain states decide that they want to charge certain crimes. So, like in some states, you have assault and battery. Like it's just weird how it works. There's really no good reason for it. It's just certain states come to certain conclusions about how they prosecute crimes. But yeah, in one state it might be aiding and abetting. In another state it might just be an accessory. In another state it might be all three. It really just depends on where it happens.
And yeah, so if people want more exacts, luckily Jojo lets us know it's in Florida, so you could probably look that up on your own time to see more nitty gritty details. But for this, me and OG agreed we're gonna more focus on common law, as that's something he's more focused with, at least as far as his
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, I guess. And it's a
Yeah,
lot
so
simpler to talk about. Be honest with that.
remind me what crime she was ultimately charged with. Like, does it say the exact crime she was charged with in the end?
Let me look that up real quick.
Yeah, while you look that up, I'll just kind of briefly talk about it. So, the way intent works, right, at least with murder, is in order to commit murder, like actual murder, you need to have intended to either cause harm or cause the death of the person. And in situations where you didn't, but you still caused the death or the injury, then it's a lot harder to actually charge the person with murder. And in that case, that's when you would be charged with what is called manslaughter. And manslaughter is basically you didn't intend to do it, but because you did, you're still criminally liable. And there's varying punishments for that. So there's involuntary manslaughter, which is what would typically be here, is you're just driving. Most people don't get in their car like, man, I hope I drive somebody over today. At least I hope you don't. But it was an accident. It was completely an accident. But she did ultimately cause the death. Or, excuse me, the boyfriend did, but she was charged with it. So because it
So
was
I
an accident,
checked.
go
She was
ahead.
framed for what's known as a DUI murder, is what it says here.
Okay, that's interesting. So that might be a Florida thing. Um,
It
but
probably is. Let me look that up, actually.
yeah, because no shade to people in Florida. No jab to the state of Florida, but DUIs do tend to be a problem, at least in some parts of Florida. But
Oh,
yeah, so
apparently there's a thing for this.
it's in Florida, right?
Yeah, I found a thing about it.
Yeah, I would imagine it's pretty specific.
There we go.
What is it? Does it say what it is? I imagine it's just death resulting from driving under the influence, something like that.
That's basically what it sums up to. So yeah.
What I imagine that would be is because there's a common enough problem of DUIs in the state of Florida, the legislation decided to basically regulate it by saying, if you cause a death while you are drinking and driving, then because they call it murder. Does it say what the sentencing is?
So the anime / manga calls it that, which that's not an official term. So the closest thing we have would be considered DUI manslaughter, and that's
Right.
basically the equivalent of it, and it's punished up to 15 years. Basically, what the sentence she got in the anime. So this kind of makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So then
This is accurate. It's just the name's different, probably because of translation, possibly.
And that's another thing is, while it's easy to, while it's easy to like think all these terms are interchangeable, they're really not. So, what I was saying was this was more like manslaughter, which is you did not intend to do it in any way, shape, or form. So you are only liable, criminally liable, because of the fact that you, in fact, caused the death. Like, in this case, the state is saying that Jolene was driving the car. So, in fact, she caused the death because she was driving the car and she hit the pedestrian with her car and he died as a result of that accident. Even though she didn't intend to do it. So because she didn't intend to do it, you're not punished as severely as if she had like planned it out a day before.
Yeah, I think from what I'm looking here, I think what happened was Aki just had a mistranslation. So when he translated probably the Japanese equivalent, it basically translated to murder, basically.
Okay.
Which kind of makes sense. I could see that.
Mm.
It's a lot smaller to fit on a page than manslaughter. It's a lot longer of a word.
But to go back to what I was saying earlier, assuming this isn't actually the case, let me just put the hypothetical out there. There are certain kinds of laws where, because of legislative goals, there are certain crimes where the state will impute knowledge or impute intent, right? Given the nature of the crime. So for example, right, let's say there was actually such a thing in Florida as DUI murder, not manslaughter, but murder. And maybe it worked like, if you get in your car while you're drunk, then if you kill somebody, we're going to assume that you intended to, even if you didn't, because we want to regulate against drunk driving, if that makes sense.
That can make sense. I think how I would have done something like that, it's like, oh, if you have intent of wanting to possibly do it to someone, and you just happen to do it, that's considered murder.
Right. There are other forms of it. Go ahead.
So, like, for example, let's say, I don't know, I want, like, Philly dead for whatever reason. And I have, like, written record somewhere that I want that. If I happen to get drunk and run him over, there's clear intent that I had subconsciously, even though I may have not intended to do it, theoretically. Mm-hmm. Which is stupid, but that could make sense.
No, that
really
would actually
semantics.
That would actually, if that came up in discovery, which is like the period where the lawyers are looking for all the information and the facts before they go to trial. If that came up, that would be grounds for like an actual legitimate murder charge, because then
that to me makes more sense than what they explained in the show. Like they just really rush it by.
Well, part of it is because I don't remember exactly what was charged, but yeah. But more what I'm saying is there are certain situations where the legislature will set a goal, right? So, not to get too touchy, but just to give you an example, right? Statutory rape. That's the kind of thing. This is like the inverse. Because we want to obviously make sure that minors aren't having sex. In those situations, we assume that minors don't consent because we don't want them to have sex. Like, that is the goal of the law, if that makes sense.
That's understandable.
So vice versa, if you wanted a DUI murder law and you wanted to tell the people of the state, hey, you need to not drink and drive because we're prosecuting against it, then you would make a law that says if you get in a car while you're drunk and you kill somebody, then under the law we're going to assume that you had the necessary intent to inflict harm or murder. But I don't think that was the case here. I think it was just a mix-up, and I think they charged her with manslaughter, which is supported by the fact that she was only charged with 15 years, if that is correct.
Yeah, and like I said, the equivalent is that from looking at actual Florida law. I didn't read the actual sections, but that's what it's referencing.
Yeah, because usually with murder, you're charged with a substantial amount more. But, yeah, and another thing that is not as commonly appreciated, is the strategy that goes into charging defendants. Because in another hypothetical, right, let's say the state of Florida wanted to charge Jolene with murder, like straight up murder, not manslaughter, but murder. Then, and they only charged her, because you can do that, right? So like the state can say, well, she's guilty of murder and manslaughter. Not always the case, but generally speaking, you can just throw a bunch of crimes as long as there's a legitimate argument, and whatever sticks is the one you end up getting stuck with. But here, right, if they tried to say that she was guilty of murder and like nothing else, then she might have gotten off free in trial, because it's not clear that she intended to kill this person, or any person rather. The only thing against her is that she was, what was it she was drinking? She was drinking some kind of alcoholic fruity thing.
I'm not exactly sure, but we can at least say it's like vodka or something.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, she was drinking something alcoholic, and so that would be enough to show that she was negligent, right? And negligence is basically you weren't exercising the amount of reasonable care that the average person would, right? So the average person would know it's unreasonable to get in your car and drink. Like the average person, like the person with common sense would understand, don't drive while you drink. So if you do drink and you do drive, then that's considered negligence, because a common sense person wouldn't do that. But the problem with that is negligence isn't necessarily enough to get you to murder, because with murder, you need a certain intent to show that you really wanted to either actually kill the person or harm them. And here, there aren't any facts that show that that's what Jolene or Romeo wanted to do. Disregarding any conspiracies.
I mean, I think even if they wanted to do it that specification, you could have argued like, oh, she was attempting to hide the body, and that could have been enough for like the intent part you would have needed for like a quote unquote DUI murder, I guess. Because
Yeah,
she
that's
was in reasonable enough mind to go hide the body for whatever reason.
well. So it's not so much like a state. So I hear what you're saying. You're saying like she was conscious enough, but the way they would evaluate it is regardless of how drunk she was or how like what her ability was to reason, that's not what they're concerned about. They're concerned about her decision to be in a motor vehicle while she was drinking. Like objectively, that's just not safe. If you hear what I'm saying. Like,
So would her hiding the body be like a separate charge if this was done properly? I guess.
I'm not too sure that. So that does kind of get into intent in a sense.
'Cause that's my thing. It's like I don't know what that means anymore if someone's drunk and trying to do it.
Hmm. Well, all that really shows is guilt. So, like, if she was trying to
That could
say,
make sense, yeah.
yeah, like if she was trying to say in court, well, I didn't do it, then um, the prosecutor can say, well, you were hiding the body, so why would you hide the body unless you didn't do it? But as far as intent, um, that's not really relevant because if they've already established that she actually did it, then it doesn't matter what she did after the fact. What matters is what she did before it happened and like while it was actually happening, like in the moment. And so I'll give you another example, right? So let's totally remove, alcohol out of the equation. Let's say when they were getting in their car, right? They noticed that one of the tires was flat. But they're like, oh, screw it. We don't have time. So they get in the car and they drive. That would be negligent because the average common sense person, even without mechanical experience or knowledge, understands it's unsafe to drive without all four of your tires being filled with air. If that makes sense.
No, that's an understandable thing to think about.
Okay, good. So yeah, it's interesting to see how this played out. And then the last thing that I really have to say is the lawyer could actually be disbarred. Or if not disbarred, likely given a massive fine for what he did. Because people like to say that lawyers can just do whatever they want and get away with it, but it's not the case most of the time. Because lawyers, I actually like the way lawyers conduct themselves because they're self-governing, in a sense, not completely self-governing. They're still subject to the law, but in terms of like internally, they have rules of ethics that lawyers, so like there'll be like a tribunal of lawyers in each state, and they're the ones administering it and all that. But essentially what Jolene could do, even though she doesn't, she could file a complaint with the Florida bar, and she can say, my lawyer was dishonest, he was fraudulent, and he violated his duty to represent me. In Massachusetts, they say zealously, but the general rule is you need to represent your client competently, right? And you also have a duty of loyalty to your client, which I think we would agree the lawyer in this case clearly violated. So I would say they violated at least 5 rules that I can think of off the top of my head.
So I guess to go into that, for a question to ask about this, would the lawyer be required to specifically say what her sentence was before she could even take the deal that she was offered?
Yes and no. So, and don't take my word for this because I haven't worked in criminal law. But, so generally what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to list out all the risks so that the defendant, the client, can make an informed decision. So, in a sense, that's kind of what he did, because he said, look, you don't want to go to jail, you don't want to go to trial because you risk going to jail for even longer. That's your one option. But if you just take the plea bargain and you plead guilty, then yeah, you'll get a jail sentence, but it'll be much shorter. So that's kind of what he did. But the issue would be, he clearly knew that wasn't going to be the case. And it wouldn't be so much that he knew for a fact what the sentence was going to be, because unless the judge comes right out and tells you what he's going to say, you never know what the sentence is going to be with certainty. So you wouldn't be liable for that. But you would be liable, like in this case, where you clearly know what's going to happen and what the risks are, and you tell your client otherwise and lie to them.
Which is true. If she went to an actual trial, she could have been proven she didn't do it if it was a proper investigation, even.
Right, absolutely, because that would have come up in discovery. Now, you can also, even if you didn't know, right? So let's say the lawyer in this case honestly thought he was telling the truth. He could still be liable or he could still be fined and punished by the bar because he should have reasonably known that that wasn't the case. In other words, the average lawyer with average skill level would have known that Jolene would have faced much higher sentencing. And so he was incompetent and violated his duty.
Something else I was curious about, is it possible even after she took the plea deal, could she attempted to appeal?
No, because once you take the plea deal, that's it. You plead guilty, and you're just accepting whatever is coming. Although, don't quote me on that, because I don't know if that's necessarily true. But generally speaking, because so when you take a plea bargain, right? It's not a judgment of the facts, because there was no dispute over the facts. When you make an appeal, you're appealing a final decision. And here, the judge isn't deciding anything. They're just sentencing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I don't know how you would go about doing it.
Well, I'm
but
wondering,
in this
could
case,
she try
I don't
to
think
argue that the lawyer screwed her
So,
and tried to
I
declare
don't know.
mistrial?
I don't know how you would go about doing that, but you can. So here's what I can tell you with 100% certainty. She can go to the Florida State Bar and say, look, my lawyer violated rules 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, of the rules of ethics and conduct and ethics and all that. And so then the lawyer would have to stand in front of the tribunal, not court, because it's not court. It's just lawyers administering other lawyers. And if he was found guilty of violating those rules, depending, In this case, it's pretty clear that he would be found guilty of those violations, and he would either face very, very tall fines, like we're talking like tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and would most likely, he would definitely be suspended. So he would lose his license to practice law and would have to take the bar exam again. And then what's more likely is he would just be disbarred and wouldn't be able to do it again. Like, would not be able to take the bar again. In Florida, anyway. But as far as trying to get out of jail card, that was a tongue twister. I don't know how she would go about doing that, considering that she pled guilty. Even if the lawyer screwed up.
That's understandable.
Mm.
I do find it interesting that, like, Jojo didn't consider just bailing her out of jail.
Yeah. The thing is, in certain cases, the judge will decide whether or not there's bail.
Oh, yeah.
And even then,
true.
with bail, right? Bail just means that you don't have to sit in court, or you don't have to sit in prison while you wait to go to trial. That's all bail is.
And, oh yeah, because she did a plea deal, she didn't have that option. That makes sense.
Right, exactly.
Like,
and even if she decided to go
here, she would have been better going to trial, surprisingly.
Yeah, and if I can just speak, in this case, it seems like the judge probably wouldn't have given her bail anyway, because he seemed so convinced that she was like a major threat to the state. He would have been like, yeah, I don't really feel too safe about you being out and about among the people of Florida. You seem like a pretty certain threat to the state of Florida, so I'm not going to give you bail.
Something else interesting that I wanted to bring up is that in the manga, it's brought up that her defense attorney actually knows the prosecution. Could that be a conflict of interest, potentially?
It could be, but not really, because...
Like, he says, like, I'm good friends with them, or something. I think that's around the line they said.
The issue with conflict of interest is not so much like intent or relationships necessarily, but more like your roles. So, for example, right, if I'm representing the buyer of a house and also a seller, it doesn't matter that I know them both personally. What matters is that my relationship to the seller is in direct adversity with my relationship to the buyer, or whatever I said, buyer and seller. Because in one relationship, I have a duty, whether or not I actually want to do it, to help a person sell the house. But in the other, whether or not I want to do it, I have a relationship, or I have a duty, a contractual agreement even, to help a person buy the house at a reasonable price. So it's the conflict between those two duties, if that makes sense. So,
yeah,
in the manga, right, if one lawyer is friends with another lawyer, it might create a conflict of interest, but likely not. because just because you're friends with somebody doesn't mean you owe them any sort of duty. You
I
would
guess
only
this is more criminal, so it's more like, is he friends with the state? It's not exactly how that would work, I would feel like.
It would so an example of what you're talking about, right, is like if two lawyers are in the same firm, and so to go back to my hypothetical, two different lawyers from the same firm are involved with the same purchase and sale agreement for a house. One is representing the buyer, the other is representing the seller. That would be a conflict of interest because they're representing two sides to the same transaction, but they work at the same firm. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. But being friends, if you're the defender, being friends with the prosecutor, probably not.
Because that one I found kind of interesting when I brought up. I thought it's kind of iffy because that could just be a side note. Because the thing is, like, it's not a person kind of going against another person in a sense. It's more like the state charging someone to an extent.
Yeah, right. Because in a criminal case, you're not being sued by someone. You're being charged by the government. The government in deciding whether or not they're going to take your rights away. But yeah, the other thing too to keep in mind, right, is especially in these criminal cases, the defenders and the prosecutors see each other all the time. Like if you talk to any defender or vice versa, if you talk to any prosecutor, say, like, who's like the worst guy you went up against or worst girl, whatever, they'll have their list of people because more often than not, it's the same people working in the same area, and they're going to run into the same handful of people over and over again. So they're all going to know each other, whether or not they're actually friends.
Yeah, that makes reasonable sense. Like, you're working within the same vicinity to an extent.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like in a different room.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's all we really have, though, for this.
Yeah, that's all I have, unless you have anything else you wanted to bring up.
Not really. I think this case is fairly straight to the point for what it's meant for. I think that it was neat to cover it. The fact of like how horribly wrong this case went for the main character, and all the violations. Like you said, there was at least 5 this one attorney did just to get this through.
Yeah, it 5 is being very conservative. Probably violated a lot more.
But yeah, I think that's all we have for this. We'll probably go back to our regularly scheduled Ace Attorney podcast. I don't know. We'll see what we'll think about it. Probably starting next month because there's holiday stuff, obviously, we want to get through.
Right.
So it'll probably be after New Year's, most likely when we get back to that. This is more like a one-off thing. Talk about some other stuff time to time, which that'd be nice. I guess the other fun note is that we haven't covered a case that actually has a jury yet. So that's definitely something.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the funniest thing about the series so far.
Yeah, for sure.
But who knows? Maybe we'll cover some Harvey Birdman attorney at law, even though that jury's questionable.
Yes,
to how it's
very.
used.
Mhm.
And we'll legitimately have to actually look for something that actually uses the jury system. Because I haven't seen much media actually does personally. Have you?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
So anyways, that's what we're going to ask you. Comment down below. Comment down below a show or anime where there's actually a court system that uses a jury that is noteworthy. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head is that one special is The Adventures of Billy and Mandy, apparently. Because there's a whole movie that special is dedicated to that.
Yeah, right.
But
Well,
that's the
if we're
only
just
one I
talking
can
about
think of.
media in general, the movie I always tell people is very legally accurate is My Cousin Vinny, the one with Joe Pesci. That is very legally accurate.
But yeah, I've been enjoying this podcast, and I think OG has as well. And we're gonna end things for this episode for now. So don't forget to comment down below your ideas for stuff we should possibly look at. And until next time, see ya.